Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. Today I want to highlight Hearthstone's Replay's infographics. From time to time, Hearthstone Replay, which gathers a whole bunch of stats generally from their deck tracker based on how people play in every single game mode, they like to compile some of these stats and kind of make a Reddit post. Some of these Reddit posts do pretty well, some of them maybe not so well, but I find it pretty interesting to see what they end up highlighting, and I thought I'd give you guys a bit of an intro to this stuff, as I find it pretty interesting, and maybe you guys can see it the same way as I do. So today I'm going to post you guys the top 10 infographics that they have posted, and really give you some interesting insights to the corners of Hearthstone that have yet to really be explored. So starting off, we have the least popular cards from Rastakhan's Rumble. These are cards that nobody is playing. We have the date shown there. So this is from a few months ago. It is in the standard format, and it is ranks 5 to legend. So this is where people try to take things pretty seriously. I think it's an appropriate parameter for this particular metric. We have Mark of the Loa. Apparently nobody plays this card, even though I think it's pretty good. We have Line Cracker. Line Cracker is a superstar in Arena, but in Constructed it is in 0.006% of decks, with a 37.5% deck win rate. Holy cow, that is abysmal, right? Well, it actually goes down from there. Regenerating Thug. Just nobody plays it, but well, I guess it's not too bad. 41.8%. Maybe people are playing it in like decks with a bunch of buffs. It would kind of make sense. We have Gurubashi Chicken. Some people actually played this card, but it looks like they were not very successful. 24.8% win rate. You have to keep in mind, 24.8%. That's pretty bad. That's like you get 10% win rate from your opponent disconnecting. I mean, so that's slightly higher than that. Really goes to show just how terrible that card is. And it's even more terrible than Arena Patron, which is played half as much. 0.002%. Oh my god. It's like, this card just doesn't exist. Right? I mean, we kind of knew that. We kind of knew this card would be absolute garbage. So it kind of makes you wonder why it kind of showed up the way that it did. Nevertheless, the two people that have ever played this card in ranks 1 through 5, they won 30.8% of their decks. Legends, boys. Legends. The next infographic is from a Tavern Brawl that happened a few months ago. It's the Royal Recipe Tavern Brawl. I always find this specific Tavern Brawl very interesting because it happens typically like a couple of weeks after an expansion is launched, and it really goes to show just how balanced the deck recipes of the brand new expansion are. And, you know, this is kind of like, I feel, a fairly decent testing metric. So it's kind of like what Blizzard thought the game would kind of roll out as. You know, they kind of thought that Mage, is the number one pick there in terms of win rate, would be a pretty damn good class in the expansion. They thought Druid would be a pretty weak class in the expansion. Now again, this is right after the expansion came out. It turned out that Druid is actually a little bit stronger than Blizzard had anticipated. Just going through, Mage 63% win rate, remarkably higher than all the others. The Mage recipe for this expansion is Odd Mage with Jan'alai, so understandably that is a pretty powerful deck, and Blizzard thought it'd be really powerful. I guess it still is, as Jan'alai sees play in Secret Odd Mage, one of the most competitive decks out there right now. Warrior, Hunter, Paladin, Priest, Rogue, Warlock, pretty average, but the extremes are so interesting. You know, Blizzard's setup for this expansion is that Shaman and Druid are weak, where these decks had to be so nerfed. Like, not those two decks, but the decks that involved Shamans and Druids had to be so nerfed, and they're still being played reasonably well. Even Shaman was one of the best decks. The whole expansion, they had to annihilate Flametongue Totem, and even Shaman is not played very much today, but it's actually a pretty high win rate deck even still. Now, Druid was plaguing the expansion, as it has for the last few, yet 37.6%. Yeah, I'm not so sure about that. The next infographic is from another Tavern Brawl that I find particularly interesting. It is the Hallucination Tavern Brawl. The Hallucination Tavern Brawl is very interesting because it's one that people play cards they're not typically used to. Hallucination is the rogue card that gives you 3 options, cards from your opponent's class. So, for example, if you pick Warlock, which seemingly has the highest win rate, you're not actually going to be playing Warlock cards. The only thing that Warlock has is the hero power. And, well, that can be pretty interesting. It's kind of like a metric of not only like what people like playing, because in this Tavern Brawl, because you don't actually play your class's cards, it's what people like playing that also has typically bad class cards. So Warlock has a good hero power, which is shown by its win rate, and on average, crappy class cards, which are those cards that your opponent are going to generate from their hallucinations. While if you play Priest has really good class cards on the other side of the spectrum, because, you don't win that much, because your opponent's playing Priest cards. Priest cards are pretty good, as it turns out. At the same time, Priest hero power is pretty weak. We see a lot of classes in the middle, but it's pretty interesting to see it laid out that way. It really kind of gives you insight on the basic mechanics in Hearthstone and how people interpret them through a game mode like this one. Next infographic is most popular legendaries. So this date range is from the second part of January. And we see some pretty interesting ones here. In percent of decks and average deck win rate. So if you've ever seen one of my videos on what legendaries to craft, this is a pretty nice way to show that information. Now, some of these cards, a lot of these cards are rotating out. For example, Deathstalker Rexar and, Shadow Reaper Anduin, and the Lich King. So if you're not playing Wild, I wouldn't recommend you just go ahead and craft like all 10 of these. You have to be mindful of when these cards rotate out, but otherwise, it's a pretty clean-cut explanation of what's good and how popular it really is. We see that Zilliax is extremely popular. 27.7% of decks actually include Zilliax. We see that a lot of hunter cards, particularly the Death Knights, are also very popular. But I think this was before people kind of changed things as a result of the nerfs that Hunter received. But nevertheless, we see Baku, we see Lich King, we see Leroy. Malygos is surprisingly high, but 8.6% of decks ultimately isn't really that much. Next infographic is a new challenger. This is right after the expansion has come out. It is ranks 5 to legend, I guess, but it doesn't really matter because people don't play that card in Constructed, but people do play this card in Arena, and I feel like the system is very similar for Constructed and Arena when it comes to a new challenger. So a new challenger is a 7-cost spell that discovers a 6-drop, and it comes into play with Taunt or Divine Shield. So the most popular one in terms of times picked and its win rate is Damaged Stegatron. That's understandable. The battle cry doesn't go off, so you're getting a 7-mana, 5/12 Taunt Divine Shield. Of course, that's pretty good. Next up, you have Cairn. Cairn does a pretty good job. We have Blackguard. I see Blackguard picked a lot in Arena, but it often falls apart to things like Shatterword Pain. Nevertheless, Hungry Etten we see next. I think Hungry Etten in Arena would probably be a little bit better than Blackguard, but sure, that's just because you can't quite get the healing synergy as often as you'd like playing Paladin. And Hogger, of course, makes the list. Those win rates, I would say, are just comparative. So yes, the Damaged Stegatron is a bit better than Cairn, and those two are quite notably better than most of the other options. So those are the ones that you want to pick, basically. The least picked, and you can see that the win rates actually kind of fluctuate a little bit. I mean, Priest of Elune, it seems like a really bad card, but it's like 36.6% win rate. It's certainly not as picked as Mossy Horror, but Mossy Horror has a worse win rate. So it seems that when you have something with Taunt and Divine Shield, having higher attack actually possibly better than we think. And it's really cool to understand these concepts about how we play Hearthstone and the mistakes that we make through such obscure infographics and statistics. Most and least popular spells cast by Zuljin. This is just kind of a fun one. It kind of gives you insight into what spells people are actually playing, and those that end up being, regurgitated out with the Zuljin drop. I'm surprised. Okay, so, all the most cast ones, we know them, right? I mean, this is end of December. Yeah, it makes sense. We got Spell Hunter, we got Secret Hunter. Yeah, we got it. But the least cast, this is hilarious, right? Like Goblin Prank, 0.13%. I mean, that's hilariously high. That card's terrible. Yes, some people played it in the Death Rattle decks, but most of the Death Rattle decks didn't actually include Zuljin, but I guess they were powerful enough that it actually had a 55.5% win rate. That's unbelievable to me. Dinomancy. Someone played that card. Unbelievable to me. Play Dead, makes sense. Should have been a bit higher, but again, the hunters that ran Death Rattle decks typically did not include Zuljin as a hero, so I guess that is a bit of a niche thing. The Marsh Queen, a lot of people hypothesized that this would actually work pretty well. Just not a lot of people tried it, but yeah, 60.8% win rate. That's really high. It turns out getting your double quest and having an easy trigger the second time around is pretty good. And of course, the Boomzooka, well, a few of them had fun with it. Blast Wave. This is a good one here. So Blast Wave is a card that's been really talked about, even by me. I think it's very good in Arena, and I thought it was pretty good in Constructed. Well, I would say I was probably wrong about Constructed. This is at the end of December, where people were actually playing the card in pretty reasonable quantities. So what happens when you play Blast Wave? So 67% of the time, you get no spells. You just do 2 damage for 5 mana. And if you do that, your win rate is 45%. That's okay. We have to keep in mind that Blast Wave, while it was pretty popular, it was used in Odd Mage, and if memory serves me right, Odd Mage had probably about a 54% win rate, something like that. So yeah, you generally don't want to get 0 spells. If you get 1 spell, it's not much of a difference. But between 0 spells and 1 spell, that's 84.4% of the time that happens. So most of the time, within that meta, you just didn't really generate anything. But when you're getting 2 spells, your win rate was all right. When you're getting 3 spells, your win rate for the deck increased, but that was only 4% of the time. When you're getting 4+ spells, your win rate is 58, which is quite sizable. Now, you have seen a decent number of highlights on my channel talking about how this card just does some crazy stuff in Arena. But in Arena, it's just a different ballgame with this card. One of the most powerful cards in Arena is Violet Worm. When that dies, it generates 7 1/1s. Most decks have Violet Worm, so if you ever match up Violet Worm against Blast, you just win that game. Right? So I'm sure the win rates on how many spells you actually generate are pretty fair, but in terms of the frequency of generating a large number of spells, it's certainly a lot easier to get a value Blast Wave in Arena than it is in Constructed, and that's kind of been the main downfall. Most popular Epic cards. This is just this week, really. February 5th to 10th in Standard all ranks. It just gives you an idea of what people are playing. Epic cards are kind of the most costly cards in the game. I think that's why it's quite significant. An Epic card costs, decent portion compared to a Legendary. And most importantly, you need 2 of them. A lot of time when you run 1 Epic copy, or 1 copy of any card, you want another copy except for Legendaries, where you can't do that because that's part of the card design restriction. So what are people playing? Shadow Visions, of course they are. Psychic Scream, of course they are. Glutinous Ooze, that surprises me. I feel like a lot of people are playing Ooze, but a lot of people are playing the Vanilla Ooze, the 2-mana Ooze. The fact this is 11% of decks, that's a lot. That's a lot more than I thought. Master's Call, 9% of decks. Wow, some really adventurous hunters and 56% win rate. That's pretty good. Doomsayer hasn't really made it. Doomsayer tends to excel in the early parts of a year when there's not that many sets in Constructed, and the pace of plays typically slow. And Doomsayer tends to absolutely suck at the end of a year or before the first expansion of the year when there's the most sets in the standard format. That's when the decks are the most aggressive. So yes, Doomsayer, not very powerful right now, but I think a lot of people just have that card because it has that natural cycle of power levels, and soon enough, I think we'll be seeing a fairly high win rate of Doomsayer once again. Mountain Giant makes an appearance. Cube makes a pretty good appearance. Corridor Creeper, 58.5% win rate. Holy crap. What this tells me is more decks should be playing Corridor Creeper. It just seems to be really good right now. Primordial Drake, very similar. Crowd Roaster, very similar. But I think most of those are going to be seen in like the Dragonish, Warriorish decks. And again, those are pretty fringe, but their win rate looks pretty solid. Next infographic, we have most popular minions eaten by Carnivorous Cube. So Carnivorous Cube is just a card that I think most of us really dislike. But it's just so powerful. I mean, we see the popularity in the white, and we see the win rate when eaten by Cube. It turns out when you cube just about anything, you just win the game. When you cube a Doomguard, game's over. 75% win rate. Cube a Devilsaur Egg, 57 is pretty good. Cube a Devilsaur, 71. A Witchwood Grizzly, 73. Voidlord, 70. Another cube, it's not even good. 67.6, right? Spider Bomb, 50%. Mountain Giant, 62. Mechano Egg, 64. King Crush, 86, right? The reason I think this is particularly interesting and relevant to just Hearthstone in general is that there's a lot of ways that I'm sure Blizzard looks at stats, but some are much more appropriate than others. I think if you just look at the win rate on average of Carnivorous Cube, you're just going to get a number that's not going to stand out. It's going to be like 50-something. It's like, yeah, okay, this card seems balanced. But it's when you see statistics like these of when you use a card, not just in its ideal case. When you cube a cube, you have nearly 70% win rate. So when you actually play the card on another card, it's insane. You know, these are the type of statistics that Blizzard should be looking at, I think, when it comes to these cards, because it really goes to show that the synergistic component of this card is out of this world, and maybe people don't want to experience that polarizing aspect where you don't cube anything, well, you just lose. You cube anything, well, you just win. You know, I don't think people really appreciate that type of game plan, and I think it's infographics like this one that let us understand that there are more statistics than just pure win rates of a card overall. And the most interesting infographic that I've seen, it's from some time ago. It's during the first month of the Rastakhan expansion, most and least popular spells paired with Zentimo. So we didn't see a whole lot of Zentimo on ladder, but is nevertheless a very cool card, and it just goes to show some of the crazy stuff that people have come up with. So the most popular stuff, Unstable Evolution, sure, we got that. A lot of people are going to try this. I tried it myself. It's some cool stuff. Hex. Surprisingly, if you hex 3 things, your win rate doesn't even hit 50%. Yeah, turns out just giving your opponents taunts is not as good as it seems. Earthen Might, however, buffing a whole bunch of stuff, well, that's a different story. 58% win rate, very strong. Big Bad Voodoo, sure, why not? You're typically going to lead into a card that actually targets something. Rockbiter seems very good, 61.8% win rate, but that's kind of like a finisher card. It's not like Earthen Might where you're making a tempo play. You typically play a Rockbiter on multiple targets when you're about to kill your opponent. It's like a 9 damage 2-cost spell. That's really good, by the way. So I can understand that. And actually, at 61.8% win rate, maybe it's time I give Zentimo another try tonight. For the least popular spells, we see some really terrible ones. Surprisingly, Avalanche is not very popular. Avalanche is actually a pretty good card, and they never expect it. I have played Arena. I've been mercilessly crushed by my opponent's Avalanche, and like 2 turns later, I forget to play around it. It's like the most forgettable card in the game. But yeah, actually the win rate's pretty good, 51%. It's not bad. I mean, if you compare it to like Hex, it's better to Avalanche with Zentimo than it is to Hex with Zentimo. How crazy is that? Frost Shock, not too bad. Ancestral Healing apparently is really good too, but there's probably some kind of combo I don't know about. Lesser Spellstone, obviously that's very cool. And Volcano, for some reason. People play it with Zentimo. Not really sure why. Probably just accidentally. That's it, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed this content. Let me know if you do, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.